Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we bring you tales of resilience, redemption, and the strength of the human spirit. Today, we follow Grace Carter, a woman who rises from the devastation of betrayal to rediscover herself and build a life of purpose. Stay with us for this inspiring journey of love, loss, and renewal. The grand ballroom of the Lexington Hotel in New York City was a masterpiece of elegance. Its high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling glow over the crowd of the city's elite. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns mingled with glasses of champagne in hand, their conversations punctuated by bursts of polite laughter. It was a night of celebration for Carter Enterprises. Yet another achievement for its illustrious CEO, Ethan Carter. Known for his charm and brilliance, Ethan's name was synonymous with success. And tonight, his presence radiated the confidence of a man who had built an empire. At the edge of the room stood Grace Carter, Ethan's wife of 7 years. Her emerald green gown hugged her figure, though the soft swell of her pregnant belly hinted at the life growing within her. She adjusted the sapphire necklace resting on her collarbone, a gift from Ethan during the early golden days of their marriage. Back then, it had been a symbol of his love and admiration. Now, it felt like a heavy chain, a relic of a bond that had eroded under the weight of ambition and betrayal. Grace watched from a distance as Ethan commanded the room, his dazzling smile capturing the attention of everyone around him. Yet, she saw past the facade. She recognized the coldness in his eyes, the calculated precision in his movements. Tonight, something about him seemed especially distant, and an unease began to churn in the pit of her stomach. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan's deep, commanding voice cut through the hum of conversation. All eyes turned to him as he stood poised at the center of the room, his Italian suit perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable. Grace's heart skipped a beat as she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. Tonight, we celebrate not only the continued success of Carter Enterprises, Ethan began, his tone smooth and assured, but also the dawn of a new era. Applause erupted, though Grace could barely hear it over the rushing sound of blood in her ears. Something about Ethan's words struck a chord of dread within her. She scanned the room, her gaze falling on Charlotte Weston, the company's new financial director. The young woman's scarlet dress clung to her like a second skin, her posture exuding confidence. Charlotte raised her glass toward Ethan with a smile that Grace could only describe as predatory. Ethan's eyes met Grace's across the room, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw hesitation. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Before we continue, Ethan said, his voice unwavering, I have a personal announcement to make. Grace's heart sank. The air seemed to grow heavier, the chatter around her fading into a distant murmur. She instinctively placed a hand on her belly, as though shielding her unborn child from what was to come. My wife, Ethan continued, his words slicing through the silence, believes she is carrying the heir to the Carter legacy. But I must clarify something important. The room fell deathly quiet. Grace felt the blood drain from her face, her legs threatening to give way beneath her. She clutched her champagne glass so tightly that it seemed to tremble in her hand. This empire, Ethan said, his gaze now fixed on Charlotte, is moving in a new direction. One built on genuine partnership. He raised his glass toward Charlotte, the meaning of his words unmistakable. To true partnership, in business and in life. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the reality of Ethan's statement sank in. Whispers and shocked glances darted around the room. But Grace heard none of it. Her humiliation burned like fire, radiating through every fiber of her being. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly betrayed. Yet, Even in her devastation, Grace summoned the strength that had always defined her. She refused to crumble under the weight of Ethan's cruelty. Slowly, she rose from her seat, her movements deliberate and composed. With her head held high, she walked toward the exit, ignoring the eyes that followed her every step. Her tears threatened to spill, but she would not give Ethan or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her break. The cool night air hit her like a wave as she stepped outside. The sounds of the bustling city a stark contrast to the chaos roaring inside her mind. She clutched her clutch bag tightly, her knuckles turning white as she struggled to contain her emotions. "Mrs. Carter," a familiar voice called out softly. It was Marcus, the family's longtime security guard. He approached her cautiously, his expression one of genuine concern. "Can I call someone for you?" Grace shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. "No, Marcus. I'll handle this." She climbed into her car, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. Through the rearview mirror, she saw Ethan and Charlotte leaving the party, their laughter echoing in her ears like a cruel mockery. The sight shattered something deep within her, and the tears she had been holding back began to flow freely. As she drove aimlessly through the streets of New York, her thoughts turned to the baby growing inside her. This child would depend on her for everything, and she would not let Ethan's betrayal define their future. The life she had known was over, but a new chapter awaited, one she would write on her own terms. By the time she reached the outskirts of the city, the faint glow of dawn was beginning to light the horizon. Grace made a decision in that moment. She would leave behind the glittering facade of Ethan's world and carve out a life of her own. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing with certainty: she would rise from the ashes of this betrayal stronger than ever. The drive from New York City to Seabreeze Cove was long and grueling. But for Grace, it was the first step toward reclaiming her life. The coastal town, with its quaint charm and breathtaking views of the Atlantic, seemed like a world away from the glittering chaos she had left behind. Here, surrounded by the serenity of rolling waves and the cries of seagulls, she hoped to find the peace she so desperately needed. Grace's destination was the Seabreeze Inn, a cozy bed and breakfast owned by Eleanor Whitman, a cousin of one of Grace's few confidants. Eleanor, a warm and perceptive woman in her 60s, greeted Grace with open arms as she arrived. The inn, with its white picket fence, lush garden, and Victorian-style architecture, exuded comfort and safety. Grace's room on the second floor offered a sweeping view of the ocean, the rhythmic crash of waves providing a soothing backdrop. Eleanor, with her nurturing demeanor and gentle wisdom, became an anchor for Grace in those early days. "Sometimes," Eleanor said over a cup of chamomile tea, "we have to lose everything to find out who we truly are. It's painful, but it's also an opportunity." Grace nodded, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly. "I just don't know where to start," she admitted. "You start here," Eleanor said with a kind smile. One day at a time. Life in Seabreeze Cove was unlike anything Grace had known. In New York, her days had been consumed by high society events and the constant pressure to maintain appearances as Ethan Carter's wife. Here, her mornings began with long walks along the beach, where the salty air seemed to wash away her sorrow. The afternoons were spent helping Eleanor with light tasks around the inn, folding laundry, arranging flowers, or preparing rooms for guests. The simplicity of small-town life gave Grace the space to breathe, reflect, and slowly rebuild. One afternoon, while organizing the inn's library, Grace stumbled upon an old Nikon camera tucked away on a dusty shelf. She turned it over in her hands, the cool metal unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. Eleanor noticed her curiosity and explained, It belonged to my late husband, Henry. He loved photography. He used to say it helped him see the beauty in the world, even during hard times. Grace hesitated, unsure of what to say. I don't know anything about photography, she confessed. Maybe it's time to learn, Eleanor suggested with a wink. It might just give you the perspective you need. Grace took the camera with her on her next walk along the beach. At first, she wasn't sure where to begin. But as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with golden hues, she instinctively lifted the camera and snapped her first photograph. The image wasn't perfect, but there was something magical about capturing that fleeting moment of beauty. It felt like the beginning of something new. As the days turned into weeks, the camera became Grace's constant companion. She began documenting the world around her, the glistening shells scattered along the shore, children building sandcastles, and the dramatic interplay of light and shadow during storms. Each click of the shutter felt like a small act of reclaiming herself, of finding joy and meaning in the present. One evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Grace ventured out to the beach. The stormy sky was a deep, brooding grey, and the waves crashed violently against the rocks. She noticed a lone seagull perched on a broken post, its feathers ruffled but its stance resolute. Grace snapped a photo, the image capturing both the chaos of the storm and the resilience of the bird. When she reviewed the photograph later, she felt a deep connection to it. It was a visual metaphor for her own journey, a reminder that strength could be found even in the midst of turmoil. 3 months after her arrival in Seabreeze Cove, Grace's belly was round and full with life. She was beginning to feel a sense of stability, a foundation upon which she could build a future. One morning, Eleanor entered the kitchen waving a colorful flyer. "The Seabreeze Arts Festival is this weekend," she announced. Her eyes alight with excitement. "And you, my dear, are entering?" Grace laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I'm not ready for that." "Of course you are," Eleanor insisted, her voice firm but encouraging. "Your photographs have soul, Grace. They tell a story, your story." With Eleanor's insistence and the guidance of Benjamin Russell, a professional photographer staying at the inn, Grace prepared for the festival. Benjamin, with his sharp eye and gentle demeanor, became a mentor to her, teaching her how to refine her craft. "Photography isn't just about what you see," he told her. "It's about what you feel. Let your emotions guide you." Grace curated her collection carefully, selecting images that spoke to her journey. The centerpiece was the photograph of the seagull, a poignant symbol of resilience amid chaos. When the festival opened, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. Visitors wandered through the gallery, pausing to study her work. She overheard whispers of admiration and saw the way people were drawn to the raw emotion in her photographs. An art critic spent nearly an hour analyzing her collection before declaring it a testament to finding beauty in pain. Grace was overwhelmed by the positive reception. But more than that, she felt a profound sense of pride, not as Ethan Carter's wife, but as an artist, a mother, and a woman who was reclaiming her voice. As the festival concluded, Benjamin approached her with an envelope in hand. "The magazine I work for wants to feature your photographs," he said. This could be the start of something big. For the first time in what felt like forever, Grace allowed herself to smile, not out of obligation, but out of genuine joy. She was no longer defined by her past. With her baby on the way and a newfound passion lighting her path, Grace realized she was not just surviving, she was thriving. The woman who had left New York broken was slowly but surely building a new life, one frame at a time. For years had passed since Grace had left New York, and her life was unrecognizable from the one she had once known. She now stood in the prestigious Hawthorne Gallery in San Francisco, surrounded by her photographs, which adorned the walls like pieces of her soul. The solo exhibition was a culmination of years of hard work, resilience, and rediscovery. The room buzzed with energy as critics, collectors, and admirers moved from piece to piece, captivated by the raw emotion her art conveyed. Grace, dressed in an elegant navy gown, greeted her guests with the quiet confidence of a woman who had fought to rebuild herself. Her son, Lucas, now 3 years old, darted around the gallery, his curls bouncing as he explored the space. Every so often, he'd stop to admire one of Grace's photographs, pointing out the ones he recognized from their adventures together. "Mom, look!" Lucas exclaimed, pointing to a photograph of his tiny hands holding a seashell on the beach. "That's me." Grace smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Lucas was the embodiment of everything she had fought for: her strength, her hope, her renewal. Each photo in the exhibition told a piece of her story: the stormy skies over Seabreeze Cove, the solitary seagull braving the waves, the golden sunsets that had become her sanctuary. Every frame was a testament to the journey she had taken, from heartbreak to healing. As the evening progressed, Grace was approached by collectors eager to purchase her work and critics who praised the depth of her vision. But just as she began to relax, a familiar voice reached her ears. "Grace." She turned and froze. Standing before her was Ethan Carter. He looked nothing like the man she remembered. His once imposing figure had diminished, his tailored suit hanging loosely on his frame. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something she couldn't quite place: regret, perhaps, or humiliation. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" Grace asked, her voice calm but firm. "I wanted to see what you've built," Ethan replied, his gaze sweeping over the gallery. "It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary." Grace held his gaze, unmoved by his words. "Why now, Ethan?" He hesitated, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Because I made a mistake," he admitted. "I thought marrying Charlotte would bring me everything I wanted: wealth, power, prestige. But instead, I found myself trapped in a life that feels more like a prison. Her family looks down on me, mocks me at every turn. I'm nothing more than a tool to them." Grace felt a pang of something, not sympathy, but a quiet recognition of how far she had come. "And what do you expect from me, Ethan? Forgiveness? A chance to rewrite the past?" Ethan looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I needed to see you. To see how you're doing." Grace straightened, her voice steady. "You destroyed us, Ethan. But you also freed me. Because of you, I found myself again. I built this life without you, and I don't need you now." Ethan nodded, his face pale. He walked through the gallery, pausing in front of her centerpiece, a photograph of a bird's nest with a small sprout growing inside. Tears welled in his eyes, but Grace felt only a quiet sense of closure. The man who had once dominated her world was now a shadow of himself, and she no longer carried the weight of his betrayal. Later that night, after the gallery had emptied and the lights had dimmed, Grace returned home with Lucas. As she tucked him into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes and whispered, "We're okay, right, Mom?" Grace brushed his curls away from his forehead and smiled. "Yes, my love. We're more than okay." Standing by his bedside, Grace allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had risen from the ashes of betrayal, not as a victim, but as a woman who had reclaimed her voice and her strength. Her photographs had become more than just art, they were a record of her resilience, her transformation, and her journey toward a life defined by love and purpose. Ethan had chosen a path of shallow ambition and paid the price. But Grace had chosen to find beauty in the messiness of life, to embrace her imperfections, and to create something extraordinary. As she watched Lucas drift off to sleep, she realized her journey was far from over. But she was exactly where she needed to be. And for the first time in years, she felt whole. Thank you for watching today's story on Empathy Stories. We hope Grace's journey reminded you of the power of perseverance and the beauty that can emerge from life's challenges. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more uplifting tales. Share your thoughts below, we'd love to hear how this story resonated with you. Remember, even in life's storms, strength and purpose can be found. See you next time.